So on page 90, he now makes a political point. So he says, when he talks about freedom, like what do we mean by freedom? What is it really that has given us freedom? So he says, the aim of all struggles for liberty is to keep in bounds the armed defenders of peace, the governors, and their constables. The political concept of the individual's freedom means freedom from arbitrary action on the part of the police power. So let's start with the first point, though. So he's saying that where you find freedom is in control, essentially is in controlling the state. So if you think of human history, we have come from a point in which the state essentially has been the strongest in the sense of its powers over its own people. And we've come to a position where some parts of the world have fairly free countries, meaning that the government is its most limited that can be found. Now, in history, the tribes, for example, of Africa, or whatever it was called at the time, because the continents obviously drifted a bit, these were where a warlord would control, and a warlord and his army would control the citizens of his little tribe. Now, this is the worst case that you could possibly have. This is almost like the beginnings of civilization started in some kind of internment camp, and that you were heavily controlled, and culture was heavily restricted. And if you were to make paintings or vases and deviate even slightly from a prescribed pattern, that you were chastised or even killed. Like, these were very heavily controlled societies. And where we found freedom is eventually you get kind of a back and forth from religious control and state control with the Reformation and things like that, the Pope and the Holy Roman Empire and things like that. And then eventually you get the Magna Carta, which limited the king. And then you get kind of the Enlightenment movement with John Locke and limiting the state even more. John Stuart Mill's on liberty. And then eventually you get a constitution in the United States that even limits the state, or supposed to limit the state even more, although you can see how the U.S. kind of and its Supreme Court have kind of circumvented its constitution fairly well. But the point is that history has shown us that freedom has come from limiting the government, limiting arbitrary authority. And this is the limiting of both those that would be governments and, of course, those that would be thieves and murderers and things like that. Controlling the use of violence has been our solution for achieving human well-being and freedom. And we have to remember that our governments, that citizens are expected to control. And when you see failed states around the world, it's essentially a runaway state. It's a government that's gotten too powerful, such as you can see in South America and the Middle East. You've got states that are far too powerful and that are oppressing their own citizens. Those are very unfree places. Those are places that are essentially copies in history from medieval times. And how you achieve freedom, of course, is limiting those states and citizens rising up and, unfortunately, usually engaging in violence. But it's because those states, like Cuba or whatever it might be, those states are overrun or become militaristic and become essentially a historical copy of oppressive living situations. So that's the first point. So freedom is controlling arbitrary action and forbidding arbitrary action on the part of those with power, so the state and the police and things like that, holding them to rules and standards that are consented to and endorsed by the public.